You are listening to the Two and Out CFL podcast, a proud member of the Canadian Football Podcast Network.
Grab some poutine and a double-double. It's time for the Two and Out CFL podcast.
He's got it! Oh, baby!
Every week, Travis Currah.
That's Grey Cup me, which is a different person.
And Brazilian Ty.
Hunters are people too.
Talk fantasy football, bring you the latest in CFL news, and sprinkle in a little bit of nonsense.
Oh, nearly intercepted, and it's over!
Ready, set, hunt!
And welcome to this episode of the Two and Out CFL podcast as we near episode 400. We still don't have an intern to do the editing and all that other stuff, Ty.
Or to feed me painkillers.
I guess when you're 4 weeks, 5 weeks after surgery.
Almost 6, and now it's not now it's the abs that are killing me.
Oh yeah, and what's important when you golf? Your core.
Core, yeah.
Ty just making great decisions.
I swung the club maybe 20 times today, and we'll see how that goes tomorrow.
Yeah. You always got to wait with bated breath until the morning. Yeah. How are we going to do?
Delayed onset muscle soreness, my old friend.
And on this episode of Two and Out, we'll be joined by John Hodge from 3downnation.com. We'll be talking about the CFL Draft that happened this week, some other items of note in the Canadian Football League as well. But as you can tell, Ty and I are in a hockey mood as well, although that feels weird with it being 27 degrees and half of Alberta covered in a light blanket of smoke.
And fire.
Yeah.
So, so nothing's changed.
But let's play
from
hockey.
Last spring. Yeah. And hey, my draft team is loaded up with 8 Devils and 4 Oilers. So
it was looking dicey for both.
Oh, man. I was blaming you.
Devils are going to get swept against the Rangers.
2, I'm like, what are they doing? Why is your team like this?
And even the Oilers.
Me and Timo Meyer together have 0 playoff points this season.
San Jose Sharks legend looking to turn into a Devils legend.
Did anybody get that license plate? That truck that ran him over? Holy.
Yeah. Woof. Yeah. But here we are. Round 2 is underway. We'll get to John Hodge right now and talk about CFL Draft and more things on Two and Out. And joining the show right now from 3downnation.com is John Hodge. Thanks for coming on. We always like to bring you on right around draft time, but some CFL news. I just wanted to go through it with you and see where you're at with this stuff. Last week, the CFL announcing the partnership with CBS Sports, and they're sure trying to push it. A lot of mileage gained from this news. Is it a big deal as it seems like they're trying to perceive it as?
Well, I think that it is a step up from what they had.
Yeah.
My sources indicate that the old deal with ESPN paid in the neighborhood of $100,000 to $200,000 a year for the CFL, which in the grand scheme of things, when you're getting $50 million a year from TSN, is not a lot of money, right? I hesitate to call it meaningless, but it's pretty close to meaningless. The deal was about exposure and getting more American eyeballs on Canadian television. This is a step in the right direction for the CFL. I wouldn't call it a solution. I wouldn't call it a watershed moment for the CFL on American television. But what I would say is, with TSN reporting that this deal is worth $1 million annually for the CFL, is they've in a relatively short amount of time managed to 5 or 10x their pre-existing deal. And if they're able to do that again in a few years, they will theoretically be able to do that again. And then all of a sudden, okay, now we've got a really meaningful amount of money flowing to the CFL's coffers from south of the border. I know one thing that's very encouraging for me, at least in what CBS has told the fans north and south of the border through the CFL, is that they're going to actually promote these games. And that's something that has been a big challenge for American viewers. I hear it from people all the time south of the border. I love the CFL. I just wish I knew where to watch it, because in years past, ESPN would throw the game on one of their random channels, and they've got a ton of them between their traditional TV channels and their streaming services, and they do it at the last minute, and they wouldn't tell anybody which game was where. And if CBS is able to promote the CFL games and build a consistent schedule that Americans can kind of plan some of their summer evenings around, then hopefully viewership will increase. And if viewership increases, then that's right how the money will theoretically increase in the future. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but I'd call it more of a single than a home run.
A bunt single, not a bunt single though, like a legit, like hard hit ball.
Yeah, it's progress. It's progress, boys. It's not it's not revolutionary, but it's progress.
Yeah, and you mentioned money and how that the ownership of all 9 teams obviously going to really enjoy that, especially with the last couple of years that we've had and with the COVID losses and everything. We saw it with Montreal and their situation. Is there any other situations ownership-wise around the league that we should be worried about or that are not worth watching, but need to look for?
Well, I think the team, I mean, everyone's always concerned about Toronto. The good news is that MLSE has some of the world's deepest pockets. And I know that from the sources I've talked to, the Argos were fully funded through COVID. We all know that the Argos need to do a better job of marketing themselves in the city and boosting attendance, but those are problems that are not going to, get fixed overnight. I think obviously what Amar Doman is doing in BC is incredible, especially the way that recently he's worked to rally around the cries to save SFU's football team. Simon Fraser obviously recently announced the elimination of their football program. Amar Doman has put his money where his mouth is and been an incredible leader for some of the stakeholders in that community and really helped this become a national rallying cry to save this team.
Is it going to work? I mean, the movement seems pretty strong.
I'm optimistic it will. As we're recording this podcast, they are waiting for a ruling on the injunction that was filed in the BC Supreme Court. That hearing ended late Monday, and a source close to the situation told me they're expecting about 48 hours for a result to come out. And there's optimism that the longer it takes to make a decision, the better the chances are that the Supreme Court will rule on behalf of the players and hopefully reinstitute that team. So that remains to be seen. Right now, we're just waiting for a legal ruling to come down, which is not terribly exciting, but we'll see depending on which way the decision is made. But I think Pierre-Karl Péladeau, with his billions of dollars and his deep ties to the media in Quebec, is a great move for the Montreal Alouettes. I know some people had reservations about his separatist political past. And my answer to that is, show me a billionaire who doesn't have some interesting political viewpoints. I don't think you become a billionaire without having what some people might call eccentric or even problematic political viewpoints. One need only go on Twitter and check out some of the things that have been occurring with that social media app to maybe see what some of the political viewpoints are of certain billionaires. So I think all in all, it's a home run for the CFL with Pierre-Karl Péladeau, who provides not only, again, super deep pockets, almost MLSE type deep pockets for that club, but also provides the Alouettes with local ownership for the first time in forever. The one team I will highlight as maybe one that's a problem, and Ryan Ballantyne wrote a great article for 3 Down off of this. He also had Jay McNeil on his show, the formerly known as CFL Horseman, now the Go Stamps Go show, where they talked about how McMahon Stadium was not a mirage last year with it being so empty. That is a stadium that used to be much more full than it is now. They've lost 30% of their season ticket holders over the last 6-7 years and 25% since the pandemic in 2019. So that's a team that I think needs to rebuild. Obviously, they also need a new building. McMahon Stadium at this point is not only the worst building in the CFL, I think it's the worst by a pretty considerable margin.
It might be the worst sports stadium and like for professional sports in Canada, like not just football.
Yeah, maybe North America, right? Yeah. Like I haven't been to every American park, but like once the Oakland Athletics move, like I think that's the consensus worst in the United States. McMahon's probably up there. I mean, apparently a lot of fans are using
up.
Yeah, like apparently lots of fans are using porta potties during the game, which I had no idea. I've never been to a game at McMahon Stadium. And Jay McNeil, their new vice president of business operations, said he's like, we're going to try to eliminate that as soon as possible, which is great. that that's an immediate goal, but obviously there's lots of things that you can't do at McMahon Stadium to fix that venue. You just at some point have to throw a stick of dynamite and call a priest and just get it done with and move on to the next new building. So hopefully that happens. But by and large, I think the CFL is in a good position ownership wise. I think that the rising tides in the NFL have and other sports leagues have helped the CFL in that regard, because as potential owners get priced out of ever owning an NHL team or owning an NFL team or even something like an MLS team, you have rich people or rich corporations going, hey, well, why not a CFL team? And that is something that I think has really helped the Canadian Football League.
This offseason has been different than the last couple, at least for me, and maybe because I've made a conscious effort to avoid Twitter as much as possible. I'm not getting the doom and gloom sense this offseason than the last couple of years. Is that fair?
I mean, the last few years have obviously been doom and gloom for the CFL with the pandemic, and there were a ton of challenges for this league with the pandemic. But I will commend you about Twitter, because Twitter is a place that nobody should ever go, and it's something that no one should ever look at or read. And unfortunately, many of us, in media, as the three of us are, of course, even just on this podcast, are somewhat obligated to be part of. But yeah, no, Twitter is it's a barren hellscape that no one should spend any time on. If Twitter,
how dare you speak ill of Jacques Cartier?
It's been good for my head, I'll admit that.
Yeah, no, I 100% get where you're coming from. And Twitter, don't get me wrong, Twitter can be a tool that is useful, and it can be a source of good. But it seems to be getting worse and worse all the time.
The draft was just yesterday as to when we're recording this podcast. And before that, of course, was the NFL draft. And we had several Canadians getting NFL opportunities. It just seems like more and more Canadians are making more noise in the world of football every single year.
Well, we had 5 drafted in the NFL this year. That's pretty incredible. Like, that's a record. 4 had happened a couple times, and we got to 5. And then we also had 2 guys get signed as UDFAs. We had Jonathan Sutherland out of Penn State, who went to the Seattle Seahawks. I don't think he got a lot of guaranteed money. I think it's been reported, or maybe it's been speculated, he got about 10 grand. Not a lot of money, not a lot of assurance. That said, you can always make a team. Who knows? Pierre-Olivier Lestage made the team out of Montreal a few years ago for at least 1 year. If they'll take a kid from Montreal, surely they'll take a kid from Penn State. Yeah. And then the other one is Jared Wayne, who got over $200K guaranteed from the Houston Texans, which is a huge vote of confidence. And it's also a team that doesn't have a lot in the way of offensive weaponry. John Mechie III was a second-round pick there last year, didn't play this past year because of leukemia. He's hopefully going to factor into that offense for that team with their new, franchise quarterback, CJ Stroud out of Ohio State. They took 2nd overall. But Jared Wayne, that's a big commitment for that team as a UDFA to guarantee him that amount of money. So this is, I think, the best year ever for Canadians in the NFL. And that's an exciting thing for football in Canada. Obviously, I know there's CFL fans every year who kind of bemoan imagine that talent north of the border. And I totally get that. But I also think it's a heck of an advertisement for kids in this country, young people in this country, to get involved with the game, because for every 10,000 kids who pick up the game in this country, probably 1 or less than 1 will make the NFL, but there might be 10 who make the CFL, and that's a pretty good return on investment.
It always seemed like there were teams willing to, even if they got drafted or opportunities in the NFL, willing to draft them pretty high in the CFL draft. Didn't see it that much this year, did we?
Well, I think part of the issue was the draft class this year was a little bit lackluster. It's not the strongest draft class we've ever seen. And so if you're a CFL team, in a strong draft year, you might see an NFL UDFA go as late as round 3. For example, like Carter O'Donnell was a pretty recent example of that. He was signed by the Indianapolis Colts after going unselected in the 2020 NFL draft, and he went into the 3rd round to the Alouettes. This year was a bit of a different story, right? We saw Jonathan Sutherland go at 5, We saw Jared Wayne go at 16. And so if it was a deeper class, you probably see Sutherland go round 2. You probably see Wayne go round 3. As it is, though, no disrespect to the guys in this year's draft, there is still a lot of talent to be had. I think that's the reason why we saw teams a little bit more willing to roll the dice from a CFL standpoint on NFL UDFAs. It's like, okay, if we're not getting, if the player we're getting at 5 is a little weaker than we might normally get at 5, why not take the NFL kid who we think we can get in a year from now, or we think we could even get by September, right? If he's cut by his NFL team, rather than taking somebody who in a normal year might be a 2nd round pick, or in a normal year might be an early 3rd round pick, that kind of thing.
And there's always those guys that surprise you, like with how late they go. Or is there guys that surprise you with how early they went this year in the draft?
I wouldn't say there were any big surprises towards the top of the draft. The one guy that was a surprise is actually the opposite of what you asked, Ty. Sorry, is Evan Florin, the offensive lineman out of Queens.
Segue, because I was probably going to be the next one anyway.
Evan Florin, and like, I had him in the 1st round of my mock draft, and that's not because I thought he was a 1st round talent. I had him in round 2, 3 as a talent, but every year in the CFL draft, there are offensive linemen who talent-wise should probably go round 2, 3, who end up going round 1 just based off need. And this year's offensive line class was not deep, right? We had Matthew Bergeron and Sidney Sal get drafted by the NFL. Bergeron didn't even get picked. Sidney Sal, I think, went round 6 to the Riders. They'll probably never see him, but why not claim his rights that late? Evan Florin, again, I mocked in round 1. He went round 7, which I was shocked about. I don't know if there's some skeleton in his closet that I'm not aware of, or if or what's going on. But he was a guy who was a 2nd team U Sports All-Canadian for a very good Queens Golden Gales team, a team that ran the ball really well. And he tested not brilliantly at the combine, but tested better than a lot of guys who got picked ahead of him. So I was shocked to see him fall that far. The Riders got him, and I think that's a coup for them, because obviously the Riders, anybody who watched them play last season knows they need to help. They need help along the offensive line, and he's a guy who I think can provide some of that help. I'm gonna try to spend the next little bit talking to my sources, try to figure out. So what was it with Evan Florin? Because evidently it's something that I missed through my process. So that's something I strive to do, is to improve year to year for my draft analysis and my ability to assess players. And he's the one guy who in my mock I really missed on. I hit some picks. I got really close on other picks. He was the outlier. One guy who I might highlight as going a little bit sooner than I thought he would was Jake Kelly out of Bishops. He went 15 to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Kyle Walters spoke to the media at IG Field this morning. I was at the availability, and he basically said, and I appreciated his honesty, a lot of teams every year say, oh, we're just going to take the best player available. And then miraculously, the best player available happens to fit every need that they have along the way. He was just honest, and he was like, we wanted a D lineman, we wanted a DB, we wanted a receiver, and we thought that would be the best kind of route to go to get those positions based on the depth of the draft. And so had a guy like Mount Allison's Lucas Cormier been there at 15, they probably would have taken him. He went 10 to Ottawa. Jackson Ford, excellent DB out of Regina. Had he been there at 15, I'm sure the Riders take him. He was off the board of the Saskatchewan Roughriders at 11. So to me, when you see a number of DBs go and then Jake Kelly's the last one, I'm not sure he's a 2nd round pick. I will say he's a physical freak. He won the testing at the CFL Combine for the vertical jump, leapt 40.5 inches. That's like 3.5 feet. That's pretty insane. He also ran a 4.56 40. He is a raw physical specimen, and clearly the Bombers have high expectations for what he can develop into. Personally, I would have put him in round 3-4. Talent-wise, he goes 15th overall. So maybe he's a player who goes early, but you can't argue with his raw athleticism. He's one of the best raw athletes in the draft, regardless of position, and that's even including a lot of the NFL guys.
Overall, what would you say about the defense or the development of offensive linemen in Canada, because the way I see it with the game over the past several years, it's like the D lines are taking over and they're manhandling the offensive line, and it's kind of affecting the quarterback play, which I think affects the
Kind of?
game. Yeah, it affects the overall, I think, excitement of offense and what the CFL really brings to the table. And this is a weaker offensive line class that you mentioned. What's happening? I feel like it's some sort of trend creeping into the CFL with offensive linemen kind of not, or being a little bit behind the curve to their defensive counterparts.
Well, I'll say this first. This is not just a CFL problem. This is a global problem, it seems. This is something that has affected the NFL, is the lack of quality big men who can play the offensive line position. And I know something I've read or heard people speculate is part of the problem is just the prevalence of the spread offense. Back in the day when every passing play was a 7-step drop and a quarterback going through 3-4 reads, you needed offensive linemen who could really block. And some people seem to be of the opinion that with the spread offense, when the goal is to scheme your first read open every single time, regardless almost of who that receiver is, not relying maybe as much on skill, but relying on scheme to get somebody open. When the first read is always available and you're getting the ball out in 1.5 seconds, you don't need guys who can block as well, right? You can just kind of have a big body and have them do their thing. And the spread offense is completely taken over, for better or worse. It's completely taken over college football and in many aspects pro football. So that's again, me reiterating an opinion that I've come across. As far as my own personal opinion, I do think that offensive line play has dropped off a little bit. That being said, every time I talk to a scout or a team personnel guy through the draft process about how this year's draft class is not very good for offensive linemen, they tell me about how amazing next year's draft class is for offensive linemen. So as much as the D linemen own this year's draft, we had 4 in the first round. Usually it would be the opposite, right? We'd have 4 O linemen in the first round, maybe 1 D lineman. I think the O lineman in the CFL draft will be making a comeback next year as a bunch of guys. And I think, by the way, that was reflected in how some teams made their picks, is they said, okay, look, we're not going to overdraft somebody this year, because as long as we can get through 2023, we know we can get a blue chip guy in 2024.
Wow, that's some good news then. Now, last year I noticed, and maybe it's because I'm more plugged in and I'm watching every game and paying attention to who's the rookies, but it seemed like there were draft guys immediately making impacts, whether it was on specials or even on offense or defense. What are some of those draftees that are going to be making impacts in 2023, maybe early on in the season?
Well, we'll start with the number 1 overall pick. Dante Bull has a broken leg that he suffered he's about 6 months post-surgery right now. He should be healthy relatively early in the regular season, but he's not going to be healthy, at least not fully, for training camp, and probably not for week 1. That said, he's a player who I think is pretty plug and play in the CFL, potentially even at tackle. The Ottawa Red Blacks, I don't think their offensive tackles who they're projected to start this year are necessarily dominant. Dino Boyd is the starting right tackle right now. Could Dante Bull take his job? I don't think that's completely out of the question. Maybe it's an injury. You don't know, but I think Dante Bull is a guy who you're going to see make an impact on Ottawa's offensive line this year. Dante Bull is not, sometimes we talk about teams drafting offensive linemen as projects or guys who are like big balls of clay and you can develop and turn them whatever you want. That is not Dante Bull. Dante Bull he has 33 starts at a Power 5 school. He's played against some of the best players in college football. 2021, he started against Kayvon Thibodeau when Fresno State played Oregon. Kayvon Thibodeau, for those who don't follow the NFL, was the 5th overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft to the New York Giants. So like he's played against literally some of the best pass rushers in the world. He's not a guy who you're drafting to, get way better over the course of the next few seasons. He's a guy who you draft to plug and play. Will he improve? Probably, but he's closer to a finished product right now than he is to a project. I'll put it that way. Michael Broderick, number 2 to the Elks. He's going to be a monster on teams from right away. Lake Corte Moore for the Saskatchewan Roughriders, same thing. I think he's going to contribute on teams. I think he's going to rotate heavily along that defensive line, the middle of Saskatchewan's defensive line, between, you look at a guy like Micah Johnson, who's been around forever, even Anthony Lanier. Anthony Lanier's only been in the CFL for 2 years, but he's already in his 30s because he spent a lot of time playing in the NFL. To me, this is the Riders going, okay, in a year or two, we want to change one of our 2 defensive tackle spots to a Canadian spot, and we're going to use Lake Corte Moore to help that happen. So to me, if I'm the Riders, I want to get him in games as much as possible. And one other guy I'll highlight, he's 4th overall, Calgary Stampeders Cole Tucker. Literally moments before we sat down and recorded the show, boys, the Stampeders announced that Jalen Philpott, who was great as a rookie last year, suffered a serious hamstring injury while training in March. He had to undergo surgery, which to me means if he's playing this year, he's missing a lot of time. I don't want to put a timeline on it because the team didn't put a timeline on it, but I would be skeptical that he's going to be available till at least Labor Day. So if I'm the Stampeders and I had Jalen Philpott penciled in as my starter at slot, all of a sudden by drafting a guy like Cole Tucker, who is very productive with the Huskies at Northern Illinois, and for CFL fans, Juwan Breskison was a 2nd-round pick in 2016 to the Stampeders out of Northern Illinois, very good receiver. Well, Cole Tucker beat all of his production, more catches, more yards, more touchdowns with the Huskies. Same school, another Canadian, but beat all of Breskison's production. So he's somebody who I think could get into the lineup quickly with the Stampeders, partly because I think he's very good, but then also partly because guess what? There's a spot already open right now in that starting lineup. And I think he's in the perfect position to step up and claim that starting job.
You kind of mentioned the guys that fell in the draft, but is there somebody late in those late rounds, like, I don't even know if you'd call 4, but like maybe like 5, 6, 7, 8, that could step in and actually become a regular in the lineup? Like maybe not next year, but you're going to look back and be like, that was a steal.
Well, I'll look at Clark Barnes kind of for the same reason. He's a very explosive receiver. The only issue is he got hurt a lot at the university level. He went 24th overall to the Stampeders. You know, Philpott's injury is going to help him move up the depth chart right away. Barnes, if he'd played every game that he was eligible for at Guelph, he probably goes early 2nd round, maybe even sneaks into the 1st. Instead, he goes mid 3rd round and is a great positional fit for that team. Another player I'll highlight, you mentioned 4th round Ty, Theo Grant out of Queens. He's an offensive lineman who is a project, but I think he's a project who could work out. He tested very well at the combine. Again, part of a very good offensive line with the Golden Gales. The issue is he's 280 pounds, so he needs to spend a year in the gym and he needs to spend a year in the cafeteria at Queens packing the food back.
I'm for that.
I think he's exactly. It's something that I'm familiar with as well. is packing the food away. So he's a player who I think could be good. He just needs to go away for a year. I think like he's going to be sent back to school. That's my suspicion, at least. Provided that he's able to do that and you know, grow his body and continue growing, I think he could be an impact player for the Alouettes. Not for 2023, maybe not even for 2024, but he could potentially develop into a starter, I think, for them.
And my last one is the global draft. Is it having the desired effect? Because to me, I don't think the league saw a team taking 2 punters, one of which is 36 years old.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I had to do it.
I'll say this. I don't personally report on the global draft outside of tweeting a couple of basic additions. The global program as a whole was designed as a way for the CFL to increase revenue through the form of TV deals in these various countries. And to that, I will say, Bermuda, if you want to watch a 36-year-old punter from your country play in the CFL, please email the league office or different cable providers and ask them to provide that service to you. And if enough people step up, then maybe it'll happen someday. In the meantime, all the global program is an extra step for personnel guys across the league. I shouldn't say guys, personnel people across the league to deal with, and many of them, to be quite honest, don't like the program, and they kind of blow it off, and they do that out of frustration for rooms being smaller than they've ever been. And by that I mean like the operations cap limiting the number of people they can hire to run drafts and to scout and do all the work that needs to be done, and also diminishes the pay, right? You've got guys working for less money than they made 5 and 10 years ago, but their workload is doubled. And to that you might say, well, but that's the job, and you got to be competitive, and you got to take these picks seriously. And that's not an inappropriate opinion to have. But I also do feel for the guys who are making the picks, where it's like, okay, the draft pool, you'll notice, by the way, this year's draft is only 2 rounds. In years past, the draft has been 3 or even 4 rounds. I think that's a reflection of the talent pool. Because honestly, a lot of these guys, they, especially since the first days of the global program, they've realized they never play, or at least most teams don't play them. And why would you give up a job like let's say you're playing in the European League of Football? You know, a lot of these guys, I don't know the exact numbers. My colleague JC Abbott would be a better resource for this. He's a big global draft nut, but a lot of these guys can make like 30,000, maybe not 30,000, but they can make like 20,000 euros a year playing football. And they can do that while doing their full-time job as something else where they're making 60,000 euros. So you're making 80,000 euros a year, which is like 120K Canadian, to play football and do another job. And you're asking them, hey, with a week's notice, because let's remember, the global draft is on May 2nd and rookie camps open on May 10th.
Yeah.
So in the span of a week, are you willing to quit your job, leave your football team, and play professional football in Canada for half the money? And also, you're a star on your European team, and you can go be a bench warmer in Canada. That is why this program is struggling. If the money was better or the opportunity was better, you'd probably see more guys be interested. But for right now, it is kind of the parade of the punters. And that's a big part of what I think has held this program back. And every time Randy Ambrosie's asked about it, I asked him about a Grey Cup. He talks about how this is not a short-term thing. This is a long-term project. And to that, I will say, okay, well, maybe in 30 years, this thing will be kicking. But so far, it feels like it's still very much in its infancy 4 or 5 years later.
Read more of John Hodge's work on 3downnation.com and the barren wasteland of Twitter at John D. Hodge. One of the bright spots in my timeline. And thanks for coming on the show today, John.
Thanks for having me, boys. Anytime.
Thanks again to John Hodge for coming on the show. Noticing the Grey Cup economic activity in Canada neared $70 million with the 109th Grey Cup. We'll see what's happening this year in Hamilton again. I've been wondering, when are those tickets going on sale? I'm wondering if Hamilton fans, like the pressure is on in Hamilton, right?
Yeah, like, I mean, after what happened 2 years ago.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, they won a Grey Cup last year, so I don't see why there is so much pressure.
That's a good point. 2 teams exceeded the salary cap in 2022. Oh, 4 teams.
We just talked about this.
Yeah, we did just talk about it. You're right. Including the 2 Grey Cup participants. So surprise, surprise. But what do you like this Montreal going, what, almost $800 over?
Yeah.
Come on, that's pretty impressive. $800. That's about 8 footballs.
Yeah, at the same time, we got to stop calling it a cap.
Yeah, it's a
luxury tax.
It is a luxury tax, and the tax worked out for Toronto and Winnipeg, although Winnipeg would have liked it to work out a little bit better, but it did get Toronto.
Was it Winnipeg that said it, or was it Toronto's GM that said it? Like, we're not going, like, yeah, we went over, but we weren't going to sacrifice putting a competitive team on the field because of injuries.
Yeah.
So, like, as a fan, you kind of have to appreciate that they're not doing what the Devils did years ago and putting 15 skaters on the ice.
Yeah. Yeah, with the Kovalchuk thing.
Yeah, it's cheating, but it's not, because it's not a cap. It's a luxury tax. The same thing happens in baseball.
Yep.
It is what it is. They're paying the penalty, and we'll move on.
Yep, exactly.
I got no problem with it.
Your boy Richie Sindani is now a Hamilton Tiger Cat. I feel
Not
like
my
if
boy no more.
because he's a Tie Cat.
Yeah.
I just feel like you always have a guy. Taylor Loeffler used to be that guy, but judging by how many times Sindani was in a Brazilian Tie fantasy lineup,
All but 1 week, I think. It's so cheap.
yeah,
for what he gave
exactly.
you.
Nick Taylor, the veteran DB, last with Winnipeg, is now going to Calgary. So I think now you're caught up on CFL news. Rookie camp in 1 week.
Yeah, this is insane. And I'm home. Oh, well, we didn't mention with camps opening up, those when the preseason games were announced, like they took preseason games off of TSN.
I saw that.
And people were losing their minds. A couple people made the good point that these games are usually terrible, and not a lot of people want to watch it. So
Well,
I don't I never want to watch a preseason game.
I know it's the wasteland of TV. I mean, Twitter. But if there are preseason games on, they'll be complaining about the quality.
1000%. There's no winning.
What did we do?
Yeah.
What did we do? You can rate, review, and subscribe to Two and Out on your favorite podcatcher, as well as YouTube. Our pretty faces. Ty still got the mustache. I'm grayer and grayer on my beard by the
You are
minute,
married,
it seems.
so it makes sense.
We'll talk to you on YouTube and maybe on Twitter once a week or so. Take care of yourself. Camp opens soon. We will talk to you right away.
Thanks for listening. Find more great shows like this at CF Pod Network on Twitter.